Empower your leadership journey with the CEO Series. Whether you're at the gym, strolling, or commuting, our impactful dialogues with world-class leaders are just a click away. Immerse yourself in the minds of visionaries shaping today's most influential companies and innovations. It's not just an interview, it's a masterclass in leadership. Don't miss out. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms.
Good morning, good evening, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it is the award-winning show called the CEO Series, where we bring together the most phenomenal people and we talk through their careers. Our guest today is a dear friend, former colleague, Dave Zucker, Executive Vice President, Chief Marketing and Digital Officer at Purdue Foods and the GM for Maxi. And he's going to share his journey to global marketing leadership. So with that, I want to introduce Dave. Hey, man, how are you?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, Ron. It's great to see you again.
It is great to see you again, because as I said, we were talking before we went online. I said, we were at the same company, Martha Stewart, and so many talented people that were there, and it was a great part of our career journey. So walk us through that. How do you become, the chief marketing officer, starting at an organization, and you kind of climbing that ladder? And we know it's not linear. We know there's some challenges and all those things. Give us a short walkthrough of that.
Yeah, so my journey really started on the analytics side, Ron. So early in school, I was interested in a bunch of different things, but as I got further in my kind of education, analytics and math was something kind of I really gravitated to, and really kind of grew up in organizations on the analytics side. And as marketing became more quantitative, that's really where my skill set in analytics really leveraged itself in marketing, especially as digital became a larger share of people's, organizations' marketing. And then with an economics background, that was really something, economics is really kind of a mathematical language that converts people's behaviors into math. And so from a marketing perspective, that really helped.
Okay. So that kind of played in today, because now, even in human resources, which is what I'm involved in, for the most part, we're talking now and bringing in people analytics, looking at the DNA of a workforce and all those kinds of things and driving that. So would you say you were kind of ahead of your time in marketing and looking at the analytics portion of that?
I was, looking back, I think it's probably pretty fair to say that, when I was doing it, it was just more of a, it was where I was operating. And so it wasn't necessarily something where I wasn't seeing anything that anybody else wasn't seeing. I was just really gravitating towards areas of marketing that I was good at. And there were openings that allowed me to kind of take advantage of my skill sets. And it just kind of, now looking back, I think it's really, it was exciting to kind of do the things I was doing because they were available at the time.
Yeah. So, what I thought about, we were talking about the economics background, you gravitated towards numbers and analytics. When you were in school and you're coming up on trying to choose a school to go to, and then you're thinking about your career, mine was, I wanted to go in business. Where do you think the economics came from? Was it just because you were good in the numbers side in high school? And how did you gravitate towards, I want to do economics?
Ron, I think I'm sure that you could probably look back in your career and there were probably a couple of people that were super influential and kind of helped you steer in a direction. That's what happened to me. So I actually went to school to become a vet. My bachelor's degree is in wildlife biology. And I had a little bit too much fun my freshman and sophomore year. So instead of becoming a vet, I was going to become a biologist. And towards the end of my undergraduate career, I met the professor that was the head of the environmental economics department. And he really explained to me how economics is a policy tool that can be used to really influence things like wildlife management, as opposed to being a biologist and having
Okay.
more of a research perspective. He's like, if you understand economics, you can have a much larger effect on policy. And so I was awarded an assistantship to get a master's degree. So they paid for my schooling, and I taught on the side. And that's how I got my master's degree in environmental economics. And
Wow.
and that's really where the math started. And
Okay.
then I worked for 2 years as a consultant for the Office of Water in Washington, D.C. And then went back and got my doctorate in economics. And I went back because the PhD really helped me write better. And I felt I had enough information to be dangerous. And the PhD really helped me write, and it helped me really formulate a lot of the thinking from a concept perspective through math. And that's really what led me to kind of go on the marketing side.
Yeah. Wow. Lots of times on the show, there's always that one person or a couple of people that kind of gave insight to someone that was maybe didn't have a clear picture of what the future looked like. So you talked about that professor that was able to do that. How do you carry this through being a chief marketing officer and a general manager / CEO of an organization? What learnings do you pull from that and in trying to become that person who impacted someone's careers? Because you can have people who's working for you and they're kind of going through the motions. It's really not what they want to do, but the job pays and they go through that. So how are you translating that into your team's perspective?
Yeah. So, when I love coaching people. I think, one of the things that I did it when you and I were working together at Martha Stewart. Something that I found when I was in my doctorate program, or actually really in any of my schooling, is that there weren't professors that actually worked in business. And so when I graduated, it was something that I found to be really important because I think, me included, we all took those kind of intro to economics classes, and we were like, this has literally no application in the real world. Like, this just doesn't make any sense. You do all this stuff and you hold this stuff constant. And so I taught, and it was important to me to explain to students how economics is something that's extremely valuable in business. And so when I'm in business now, I kind of do it in reverse. So there's some books that I recommend that young people in professions read. So, for example, one of those books is a book by Michael Porter. It's called Competitive Strategy. And the reason I recommend that book is that it is literally the greatest explanation I have found of applying basic economic theory to the real world. And I read that book when I was in my doctorate program, and for me, it kind of congealed all this theoretical economics into something that was important to business. And I literally wrote my entire dissertation in 3 months after reading that book, because it put everything together. It'll put all the puzzle pieces together for me.
Wow.
So that's something that I talk to every young person that I mentor. I always recommend that book. The other thing that I typically recommend is actually something a mentor suggested to me when I was at Dell. They gave me 3 pieces of advice. One piece of advice was always hire better than you, which is really a very tough thing for, I think, any young person or a manager, right? You're always worried about, right? Exactly. You're always worried about like looking over your shoulder. So always hire better than you. The second thing was follow the golden rule. So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the third one, which I completely live by, is he called it fixing your grip, which I'm not a golfer, but it's a golfing analogy. And so the way he described it to me was that you go to the golfing pro and he puts your hands in a certain position and he's like swinging and it's really uncomfortable. And he says, practice that for a week, and you go and you practice it. And then you go back next week and he's like, okay, it looks okay. Now do this to your hand. And he puts your hands in another uncomfortable position. And this goes on and on and on, where week after week, you're going back and he keeps putting your hands in uncomfortable positions. And before you know it, you're swinging like a pro. And the point is to constantly put yourself in uncomfortable positions. And that's going to enable you to grow. And I'll tell you that it's, if you have people that can help guide you through that and be kind of that little birdie on your shoulder. Actually, it's interesting. I have found great HR partners like yourself, for example, that can be counsel to people during that process. That's been really helpful for me in business as I talk to people on the team.
Yeah, I was in Brussels last week. As I said, I just got back here in Dubai this morning, but we had this discussion in the session. It was on succession planning and leadership development. And one of the things kept coming out from people in the room, when you talk about hire better than yourself, if you think of that, a lot of managers are intimidated by that because they're looking over their shoulders. And that could be an old school concept that if I prepare you, you may take my role. But if we look at that from bringing the flock together, and I want to mentor and help these people move beyond that. How would you counsel if we had a group of those leaders in the room with a little hesitant about succession planning and bringing in their, I'm going to say possibly number two, of building a strong team? How would you counsel them or coach them through that process that they got to get over the hump and thinking about, moving the organization or team forward or whatever it would be? How would you?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. From a personal perspective, I would say it is a very uncomfortable position. I've been in that position where people that have worked for me have been promoted to be my peers. And it is a weird experience to go through. And I literally kind of had to get inside my head and get comfortable with it. I would tell you that after playing it over my head a couple of times, talking to some mentors, the way I kind of think about it now is that I think it's a strength of somebody to be able to say that, if you hired that person, that is a great strength of yours, to be identifying talent and acquiring talent to an organization that is not only good for the organization, but that you feel comfortable as a senior person, as a manager of whatever level you're at, to be able to bring people in that you're not afraid of that. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that I think it shows a great deal of, gravitas for a person to be comfortable in a situation like that's very uncomfortable, where they've got to put themselves in a position where actually accept that person onto your team and work with them. I personally think it says a lot about you as I look to people that are on my team that I see that, where they might have someone that's underneath them or a peer of them that's as good or better than them. Look, you have to figure out kind of where then you fit in the organization and how you fit. But I think that the other thing I suggest to people is also have the perspective of what your boss would look at. Because if your boss is thinking, hey, this person is a good person at identifying and growing talent, that in and of itself is fantastic. And the person that might be good at the specific role that you're talking about might not be a really good identifier of talent, which might be your superpower. And so, you kind of have maybe think about that as a balancing act.
Yeah. You know what you just mentioned to me that I thought about, that kind of resonated with me, being comfortable, being uncomfortable, because of learnings that come from that. I gave a speech a few weeks ago in Pakistan, and, we were talking through that whole concept. And I said, success comes from failures. You learn more from failures than you'll ever learn from success. You learn more from bad managers than you do from good managers. So you take all those things forward, and that kind of packages it up into what you were just talking about, being comfortable, being uncomfortable. Oh, I love that.
Yeah, the interesting thing, one of the things that I learned after I left Martha Stewart, I worked for a startup. And the two things that were really interesting at the startup were, one was how fast they make decisions. And not only, and decisions meaning to do things and also not to do things, to get out of things. They just don't dwell on stuff a long time because they don't have the time. And so that was one thing. The second thing is how fast they move through people's skill sets.
Yes.
And so, your ability to constantly, your point about being uncomfortable is, it really is critical. I mean, you have to, I think as you become more senior, that almost is like a daily thing, right? You're gonna be uncomfortable, and you have to get comfortable. I love the way you phrase that. Being comfortable with uncomfortableness is a skill that can be a superpower.
Yeah, it is, because as I mentioned that, I said, okay, that's my next article. So I've already kind of put that down there. You mentioned the Martha Stewart phase of both of our careers, and we were talking earlier how instrumental it was instrumental for me because of the fact we were a startup and we could just try everything. And during the time I was there, I got a feature in Wall Street Journal, I got a feature in Inc. magazine. Numerous HR accolades and all those things came about because it was a startup, but you didn't have to go to all the bureaucracies to get something done. And it was kind of like, I tell people, I said, a startup is probably one of the best learning experiences you can have, because when you get inside of the org structure and you've got layers and layers and layers, and you can't really,
Yeah. So my experience at the startup was kind of similar to what you were describing. It was, I worked for, it was another one in New York City. It was after Martha Stewart. It was a company called Gilt Group. And it was amazing. It was this
Kevin, right?
Yeah.
Kevin?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know Kevin. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a great guy. Super, just kind of one of the smartest entrepreneurs. But it was this in that environment that just were amazing learning experience. At Martha Stewart, the thing about being there, so I joined later than you did. It was more of an operating company when I was there. But I remember, one of the really big kind of successes I had while I was there, Ron, was when I was working with Martha. They didn't do a great deal of research when I was there. And so one of the things I worked with the people on the publishing side was that it always fascinated me that they never cover tested the magazine or the catalog. And the reason why that was so important is that, it's crazy how old I am, but forever ago, there were a lot more, when you go to the airport, there are a lot of magazines, and that's where people would buy magazines primarily off the newsstands. And then you would get them, obviously you'd get them sent to your house. And so the cover of the magazines were really critical to get people to choose the magazines right off the newsstand. And the way that Martha did it was that, the creative team would go to her and say, here's 3 options, and she would pick the one that she wanted. And so all 3 of them were amazing. There's no, all 3 of them are amazing, and Martha always made a great decision. But the difference between what Martha wanted and what would potentially get someone to take something off the newsstand might have been different. And so we introduced cover testing, where we would take those 3 covers that the creative team would show Martha. We'd put them into online testing, and we'd ask consumers, which is the one that you like the most that would make you take it off the shelf. And most of the time it was the one that Martha chose, but sometimes it was different, and we would show her. And it was really interesting that, she very often would take, the one that the consumer would want it if it was different than hers. But the difference, it was so important financially, because obviously if you get people to take them, you're selling more. And that's, she is just like you and I were talking before, one of the smartest consumer marketers I've ever worked for, an unbelievable business person. And so she got it just like that. She's like, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. And so we started cover testing, the magazine and the catalog for those reasons, because it just gets people to take them off the shelf or open it up. And, that's the kind of thing at a startup, you have the ability. I was a junior person in the organization having conversations with the CEO, and there were 2 or 3 people in between us who were like, just go talk to her. and it was great. And that kind of experience you don't get, at a multi-billion-dollar company as much.
Yeah. You gotta So leadership navigation is a major competencies in organizations today. When I do leadership development, that's leadership navigation. Who's who? How can you navigate to get to the person that makes the decision? So, one of the points you just mentioned there was the opportunity to go to that leader and sell something, sell a concept of whatever it is. We've been doing it one way, and I'm going to say what you did was kind of disrupting the thought process of that. Have you ever gone through, and this is what lots of times the junior leaders will say, it's imposter syndrome, because now you're going to go to, say, the Martha Stewart, or it could be your chief marketing officer, analytical officer, but you're going to go in and pitch your idea. How would you coach someone who's very talented, they have great ideas? Okay, tomorrow or next week, you're going to go and you're going to present to that person. How do you develop that growth? The mindset, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ron. So I think, like we were talking before, so I love mentoring and I love teaching. I think the thing that I've learned through my career is that, and it sounds kind of crazy to say it, but just people's attention spans are so short.
Yeah.
Your ability in any level to quickly get your audience to understand kind of what the challenge is, what the opportunity is, and how you can be a solution. That's 3 bullets. If you can get those 3 bullets onto one slide and get that in front of somebody, then you've hooked them. And then, and I think the thing is that just that recommendation. So I have found at many companies, very senior people, my level, even levels above me, CEOs, who are not great at presenting, who are not great at consolidating a message into a very tight presentation. A lot of people feel that, you need to put a presentation together that walks them through all this stuff, where there's this big reveal at the end, where everyone's sitting there and like, just tell me, what do I need to go do? And so I think that if you as a manager, so the way your question, so how do I coach people? So my recommendations is to, and I this is pretty common. I think most of your audience has probably heard this, is something like you tell people what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them. Right. Yeah. And so those 3 things in general are important. But I tell people that very often, no matter how long your presentation is, you have to have a 3-bullet executive summary, because very often, at least what I have found, is that regardless of what level you're presenting to, whether it's a board or CEOs like Martha, you're not going to get off that executive summary. They're going to start asking you questions. And so everything needs to be there. And if you can take your whole concept and the whole story and summarize it into 3 bullets that you can get across in kind of an elevator pitch at 2 minutes, you're good. Because then you can have a conversation, say, oh yeah, that's a great question, Ron. Let me take you to page 33. And here's all the background data on the market, or here's what the consumer thinks. And so that to me tends to be a pretty powerful tool. But and my final point here really is that I think the difficult part is getting the new person that you're talking to when you're having these conversations is to understand how to summarize something that tightly.
I was laughing when you said 3s, because I'm a 3 person. I said, if I've got a slide, I've got 3 bullet points. But before, my way of looking at it and doing high level presentation, I'm going to give you the story first, to draw you in, tell the story. And then I'm going to use the 3 slides to walk through this. So I was doing a session the other week for a group out of Canada. And the young lady said, oh my God, I'm really thinking through it because I've got 16 slides. I said, how much time do you have? 16 slides? Have you given any thought that you may lose people after the 2nd slide and you got to go through all of those? Is there a way to condense that? And I think lots of times PowerPoint can be a crutch that we depend click that clicker, to go through. Just tell the story as to what's the key findings of that, and then you can always use it as a reference point. That's kind of my way of looking at it.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, the thing that I've been trying to do, and I'll be honest with you, I'm really not good at it, is I have been trying to convert my presentation styles into storytelling, like true storytelling. And one of the things I've been doing is I've been reading books on how to write scripts, like television scripts. And because, you know, people, you know, I mean, literally you watch a 30-minute, you know, Netflix show or something like that. And that's what they're doing is they're, to your point, like they're hooking you in, they're developing a character. And the thing that you're doing, right, you have to understand who your audience is too. Like in your position, when you're presenting, and I can just imagine the thing that I love watching your career, the thing that I think is actually amazing about what you've personally done is that you've taken a skill set that is, I think, really developed in the United States and have now done it all over the world. But there's no way that what like an HR challenge in the US is exactly the same in Pakistan or Riyadh. It just isn't. And so, you know, how you change that story, how you change that up to whatever audience you're thinking about is really complex. And again, mastering that storytelling as a skill set, I think helps that. And that's a big thing that I'm working on personally.
I had someone on the show talk through this exact same thing you're talking about with the script. And it was the first time I ever heard of that. And I forget the name of the book that she wrote, but it was about scripting. And the same as if you were doing a series, but hers was based on doing a play because she started as acting and those kind of things. How do you the character could be the concept that you're trying to sell, and how can you bake that into a script that you've got 15 minutes to walk through that? Exact same. I'll send you the link to her presentation, and she was talking about the same thing. So that script piece, so that script piece in doing that, but that's amazing. Because again, we have 15 minutes, we have 20 minutes to sell an idea, a concept. If I go to a client, I've got to sell them as to why they should use me versus another competitor. And I've got 20 minutes to walk them through that. How can I be impactful? So, and someone told me the other week, they said, we chose you because your presentation was on point. I thought my presentation was, I would just kind of walk through summarizing things. I used one slide and that was it.
Yeah. But the thing is it's the way that you come across. I mean, you're personable, you're engaging. And so if, you know, but doing that, you know, it's interesting, you know, there's this huge growth in the US over the last probably 5 to 7 years of comedy, online comedy. And it's interesting. I pay a lot of attention to comedians because they are amazing storytellers.
Oh, yeah.
But doing that, you listen to a lot of these comedians and they're like, you can't do that online like this. It's very different than when you're in front of a live audience. And they find that doing it in front of a live audience, you know, in what they call like a small room, like 25 or 30 people, is very different than doing it in front of 500 people or 5,000 people. And so they have to adjust their timing, the stories they tell, the length of their explanations based on who the audience is. And so, you know, I look at, you know, again, this is a place that I'm really trying to kind of dig into, of being a better orator, being a better speaker, because I think that as you know, one of my biggest transitions in my career, Ron, was learning around emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Which was wild to me to have that transition. This is the next big transition for me. It's just trying to figure out how to be a much more engaging speaker. Right. When you're speaking with anybody, whether it's, you know, 20 people in a boardroom or 200 people at a sales meeting, you know, as the head of marketing, I have to. Yeah. So it's just, that's kind of where I'm focusing.
Yeah. So I do quite a bit of public speaking across the globe, but the first thing I'm going to find, who's the audience? Give me kind of a DNA of the people that are sitting in the room, because that's going to kind of dictate as to key points and all those kinds of things, and not focus a lot on the slides, but I call it audience, and what can they learn from me coming in front of that. So I wanted to kind of change the conversation a little bit, because you have the analytical background, you're a reader, you know, and you try and stay ahead of the curve. What does your learning style look like? So you've gone, Max, you've gone to PhD level. How do you stay ahead of the curve with all of the changes that are going through, specifically in marketing, and analytics is playing a huge role now? And that's a lot from two angles.
Yeah, from two angles. So, you know, just my general learning, I find that online, like digital, what do you call them? Like just digital news, not print, but news, emails tend to be the best. And so there's, you know, I mean, I read kind of all the major newspapers pretty much every day. So in the US, so like Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, listen to, you know, those kind of things, because they typically have applications of a lot of things in business in those. So I do a lot of that. A lot of the topical stuff in my industry. So I'm in the poultry industry.
Okay.
So there's very specific things that are going on in the poultry industry and agriculture. What a lot of people don't realize is that the economics that we talk about, like in business and those kind of things, actually started in agriculture. Agricultural economics is actually the first economics, because we had to grow crops and you had to be efficient at growing crops. And so that's where economics actually started, was with agriculture. And so there is a great deal of math and science in the agriculture industry. And the areas that I deal with more on the consumer side are not even the most complex when you're talking about feed ratios and the kind of stuff that a lot of our science folks do. So that's a lot of what that's a lot of what I thought about kind of early on in terms of kind of applying it into in this side of the business.
Yeah, I asked that question because lots of times when I'm doing leadership development, as well as HR too, I'll ask the room, what are you reading? What is your source of insight? Where does that come from? And I'm surprised at the number of people. I think the mindset is, I finished school a long time ago, I don't have to do that anymore. But I'm thinking, to stay on top of your game, you have to do that. My daughter, I spoke to her when she was in college, and she said, you know, when I finished school, she's in marketing, and she told me, she said, I'm not going to pick up a book again. She said, because I'm just so staying up all night prepping for these courses and all this thing. And I'm thinking, how can I bust that bubble to say, the learning begins when you get that job and you're trying to get better at what you do and you're trying to move up or whatever, which way, because you have to stay current as to what's happening, which is what I basically told her, is that that's phase one. Phase 2, 3, 4 is on the other side.
I'll be honest with you. The biggest thing that I have found that's been helpful are podcasts. So like, for example, there's a bunch in the CPG space that are really powerful. There's, you know, personal podcasts where, you know, something like this, like like this is amazing. But the podcasts tend to be and the reason I tend to like podcasts better than typically reading a document. First of all, I mean, you can kind of scan through a document and get the fine points pretty quickly, which is really helpful. But what I find with these podcasts is very often these long form communications tend to be more powerful, to be able to suss out some nuances that you won't get from reading. And some of it's just the way people think, which is other than just the actual business topic they're talking about. It's the way people think. Like, for example, like for you personally, like I've talked to a lot of HR folks, right? I mean, I've been in a lot of businesses. The thing that I find fascinating about following your personal career, first of all, because I know you, and so there's a little bit of a personal connection. But the interesting thing is that you've been able, like we said, I was saying before, that you've been able to do this in different countries.
Yeah, which is different.
Because the application of human interaction by society is just different. And so for me as an economist, one of the things that I've done when I looked at different places to like go work, I looked at it from an economics perspective. So for example, when I worked at Martha Stewart, the thing that was always fascinating to me was that Martha Stewart was in every single marketing channel except movies. She was on television, she was in books, she was in magazines, she was like everywhere. And so you think about from a marketing perspective, like a demand generation, how do those different demand generation, how does that work? What are the pricing? What are the economics of all those things? Wow. When I was at Priceline is the application, was the first application of what's called a perfect pricing model, where the price that you pay for a ticket is different than the price that I pay for a ticket, but we're both completely satisfied. Okay. And so the places that I've worked have done things from that perspective. And so when I think about getting exposure to different people, podcasts tend to be a great way to do that, because it's someone like, so you have an HR perspective, you're interviewing me as an economist, as a CMO, as opposed to like just having an HR conversation. We're having a conversation it's almost like a little bit disjointed and disconnected. So something's going to come out. And that's what I find fascinating about, someone, these CPG guys, they'll interview someone that's outside of the CPG space. And so the kind of conversations happen to be different.
Yeah, so we had a doctor on the other week, and Dr. David Will, and Dr. David had gone through, he was a lung transplant surgeon, and he got to a point that he didn't want to do that anymore, and he started writing. So you talk about this changing, and you focus on one thing, and then you find this fulfillment on the other side. So when we first started this, Ade and I was kind of brainstorming as to what we could do, and we started this as a QA. We send you a QA and you would have filled it out, and then we posted it on the website. And then and he came with the idea, why don't we do it online? So we practiced a while and started doing it online. Don't even look back at the beginnings of those, because we were trying to find a way that we can make it work. And it started with an HR focus, but we weren't pulling people in because HR has bad branding. And I'll be honest, because I've been there, done that. And nobody wants to hear about HR and all those kinds of things. But then we started thinking about, what if we just bring in interesting people and talk to their career? So now it's based on the career journey, more so because the market wasn't there. I'm going to use a little, as if I know what marketing is about. The marketing wasn't there for an HR audience to pull in and grow with. Very, very limited. But when we moved to leadership, everything kind of took off.
That's amazing. It's interesting you say that around kind of changes. You were asking me before about kind of my journey in the background. Something that I'm looking into now. So we're, like I said before, we're in a very data focused kind of organization. Yeah. And what's really interesting is, and I've been as data focused as a lot of people can possibly be. I love data. I like doing the analytics and really helping people understand how to make decisions from that. Recently, I was doing a bunch of research and found this whole literally discipline, Ron. It's called decision management, where it's a combination of, people are talking about AI all over the place. Yeah. Well, decision management is, and people who are seeing this are going to be like, wow, he woke up and finally saw this, but it's relatively new from what I'm understanding. I mean, there's a lot of software out there that does it, but it's a combination of AI, machine learning, and just analytics that that enables business users to make decisions quickly, which is one of the really big challenges of all of these analytics, where I would tell you, in most organizations that want to use data, their biggest problem is just figuring out like what questions to ask. So they were like, we got to get our data right. We got to do all this stuff. And very often it's just, they don't know, like, what are they going to use it for? How do they monetize it? And so, this idea that we were talking about change and growth, and that was something to me, I was like, I've been as close as anybody could be to a lot of this stuff. And for me, it was like, wow, there's a whole avenue I didn't even realize was there.
Yeah. You kind of put it open, and there's a whole body of work. A note on that, because I wanted to get a little more into that, because lots of times when you're dealing with leaders, decision making, understanding strategy, all those things kind of come into play. And I was able to kind of morph from the HR person to more of a leadership kind of. And the way I did that was I focused on understanding business. So I said, how can I connect strategy to the business strategy? And it's worked from my side. So as we begin the process of closing down, if you look back on your career, what would you say was the best decision you've ever made? Like you were trying to figure this out, and now you're at I'm going to say the proverbial top of the food chain. What would you say was probably one of the best decisions you've made?
Well, clearly working with you, Ron, that was the best decision I ever made.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
I'll say the seconds in the mail.
I'll give you two answers. So the first answer is when I was getting out of my doctorate program, I decided not to become a professor. And I went into business. And so that was a tough decision, but some of it was because we had twins while I was in my doctorate program. So I literally needed money. And so it was more lucrative to go into business than it was. So that was one decision. But I would tell you that the other decision was more of a decision process, which is I was someone who I needed to constantly be challenged. And I made a decision that I was going to look at my career over a long term, as opposed to being someone that was going to go, if I was going to go to a company and an organization, if they weren't going to continually challenge me and grow me, I was going to have to leave. And that was uncomfortable. That was a conversation with my wife at the time, at the time we were kind of having these kind of conversations, and, because it's a very different lifestyle like we moved a lot and changed jobs a lot. There's some uncertainty in that. And so it was more of a decision philosophy as opposed to a specific decision.
If you could go back to your younger self, and how would you advise a younger you in taking this journey that you've had?
Well, I definitely wouldn't have done anything different. I think the one thing that I would have told myself that I wish I knew earlier was to be more intelligent about the emotions of business and people, is to really it was kind of mid-career, Ron, where I think I really understood, and it took some coaching from, I think actually it was a strong HR person that I'm still very friendly with, is actually the one that did this for me, where I said before, he really is the individual who helped me really understand the value of emotional intelligence and how critical that is to a leader's success. And if there was anything, and I tell people this all the time, that if you do one thing right, get the emotional intelligence right, because the IQ part of it, it's the EQ part of it, where if you're not good at that, it doesn't really matter how smart you are. You're just not going anywhere.
You're not going anywhere, and you're disillusioning your team, which means your team and that organization are going to suffer as a result of that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Inside of that space. So one of the goals of the show is that we bring together leaders like yourselves that talk through their journey and how they got to where they are today. And, as I said, we started doing this because of the fact that lots of times we get out of university and we think it's just all straight up and it's going to go here, and all these decisions you're going to have to make. And this is why the show has really taken off. There's a couple of schools that they MBA programs. This show is a must listen for their students every Friday.
Wow.
And I was glad to have that as a compliment, because we had no idea in starting that out. So in closing, any particular thoughts you would want to leave the audience with before we close out?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just be really comfortable with what you believe your superpowers are, because your superpowers are the things that you're going to be able to take to different conversations you have within the same company, as you change companies, It's what you bring to the table. And if you're
Yeah.
really comfortable with who you are and what your superpowers are, I think you're going to be really, really successful.
Okay. Okay, cool. I want to acknowledge some of our listeners. Peter Piccinini, who was a prior guest, who started out in theater, who's now wealth management. John Self started out as a police reporter in the reporting business, career executive search. And what we really appreciate all the people that listen in. We'd like for you to like, share across as we're trying to build up our base. We've won awards for this particular show. And I want to let everyone know that Dave was able to make time with us because he's a new grandfather as of today or yesterday, wasn't it?
As of today, as of yesterday. In fact, I'm officially, so in Yiddish, it's Zadie.
Okay. So what's her name? Can you share her name?
So it's a him, and I can't because they're still in the hospital, and they actually have not officially said the name yet.
Okay. Well, congratulations. Welcome to the club. I have two. So thank you so much. Stay online because I needed to talk to you once we close out. So all the guests that listen in today, thank you so much. And we'll see you next Friday. Next Friday. Thank you.
Take the CEO series with you anywhere, anytime. All episodes are now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and major streaming platforms. It's not just an interview. It's a masterclass in leadership.